perhaps the most idiotic mistake in the history of navigation, a truth that remained hidden for more than 100 years. It doesn't appear in school textbooks, it's not highlighted in major documentaries, and it's almost never mentioned when people talk about the Titanic, because it's too simple, too embarrassing, and too hard to accept. Why was the iceberg seen only at that moment, at the very last second? How could something so massive remain hidden until the final moments? The world doesn't change only because of big decisions. Sometimes a forgotten detail changes everything. That night, the largest ship in the world cut through the Atlantic as if it were invincible. Lights on, crowded halls, music echoing through luxurious walls. Everything seemed under control. And high above, almost invisible against the dark sky, a man watched the horizon, without seeing what he needed to see. This story doesn't begin with an iceberg. It begins with a locker, a key, two ordinary details, with no apparent importance. And it begins, above all, with something that should have been there, but wasn't. In 1912, the Titanic was not just a ship. It was a promise of progress, of power, of absolute safety. They said it was unsinkable, and when everyone believes that, no one pays attention to the details. That night, the ocean felt strange, too calm, smooth like a mirror. No waves, no foam, no reflections. The ice blended into the darkness. At the top of the ship, facing a biting cold, stood the lookout. His job was simple: to observe, to identify any danger, to warn in time. Minutes dragged on, and even so, something essential was missing. There was a void, a detail so basic that no one imagined it could cause problems. The Titanic moved fast, self-assured, overconfident, until, in the middle of absolute darkness, a shape appeared. It wasn't an immediate impact. It was a hesitation, a shadow, silent, still. The lookout strained his eyes, tried to understand what he was seeing, and then he realized. Iceberg ahead. The warning was given. The bell rang. The bridge reacted. But it was already too late. And this is where the real question begins. The one that changes everything you think you know about the Titanic. To understand how this mistake happened, we need to go back a few hours before the collision. The Titanic was not moving slowly, quite the opposite. Even in waters known for icebergs, it maintained a high speed. Not out of carelessness, but out of confidence. Confidence in technology. Confidence in engineering. Confidence in the idea that nothing could go wrong. Warnings had been sent by other ships, reports of ice ahead, clear messages. But none caused panic. None changed the course. None significantly reduced the speed. Because the Titanic was not an ordinary ship. It was treated as special. And when something is treated as special, the rules seem not to apply. Meanwhile, on deck, passengers lived a normal night. Some dined, others talked, others slept peacefully. No one imagined that every second mattered. Up above, the lookouts kept scanning the darkness. The cold intensified. Focus had to be absolute. But observing the ocean at night is not just about looking. It's about noticing shadows, reflections, subtle differences between sky and water. And that night, the ocean conspired against human vision. The sea was still. No waves breaking against the ice. No foam revealing danger. The iceberg didn't shine. It reflected no light. It was just a dark mass lost in the darkness. And here comes a disturbing detail. Something every ship should have. Something basic. Something obvious. But for some absurd reason, it wasn't available at the most important moment. The lookout did everything he could. Strained his eyes. Tried to compensate for what was missing. But there were limits. When the shadow was finally recognized, time had already run out. Orders were given. The helm was turned. The engines tried to react. But a ship that size doesn't change direction like a car. Seconds make a difference. And they were already gone. All of this happened because something simple was not where it should have been. And the most shocking part? is that this mistake was not a technical failure. It wasn't a broken part. It wasn't a manufacturing defect. It wasn't an unpredictable force of nature. It was human. A small mistake. Ridiculously small. One of those mistakes that, once you discover it, makes you think only one thing. How did no one notice this before? But the answer is harsh. When everything seems perfect, no one looks for flaws. And the Titanic was the ultimate symbol of perfection. Stay until the end, because when you find out what it was, you'll never look at this story the same way again. The simple mistake. The avoidable mistake. The mistake that should never have happened. That night, at the highest point of the Titanic, the lookouts had no binoculars. Yes, binoculars. The most basic tool in maritime navigation. The instrument designed exactly to see what the naked eye cannot. They were on board, but locked away, stored inside a closed locker. And the key was not on the ship. It had stayed with an officer who was replaced shortly before the voyage. No one checked. No one asked. No one noticed. The largest ship in the world set out across the Atlantic without access to a pair of binoculars for its night lookouts. This is where it all clicks. Because the iceberg didn't appear out of nowhere. It was always there. What was missing was the chance to see it sooner. With binoculars, the subtle reflection, the distant silhouette, the faint contrast against the horizon could have been noticed seconds or even minutes earlier. And at sea, minutes change destinies. Maybe the helm would have been turned sooner. Maybe the speed would have been reduced. Maybe the collision could have been avoided. Maybe. But that chance never existed. All because a key was left behind. A forgotten key. A ridiculous detail. A mistake that sounds like a joke. If it hadn't had such severe consequences. And the most disturbing part is that this information was buried for years. Because it's hard to accept that a tragedy of this scale could have been influenced by something so banal. It's more comfortable to blame fate, the iceberg, the dark night. But the truth is more uncomfortable. It wasn't just the ice that sank the Titanic. It was overconfidence. It was haste. It was the lack of attention to the basics. If you made it this far, comment now. Do you think that with binoculars, the Titanic could have avoided the disaster? Or do you believe nothing would have changed? This story reminds us that great tragedies don't always come from great mistakes. Sometimes, they begin with a forgotten detail, a common object, a key out of place. And that is the truth that remained hidden for more than 100 years. If this video made you think differently about the story of the Titanic, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel to follow real stories where small details trigger massive consequences. Stories of the domino effect, of the butterfly effect, of silly mistakes that change the course of history. And remember, in history, the world doesn't change only through big decisions. Sometimes, a forgotten detail changes everything.